Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Redberryweo here, and welcome back to another quick Civil Air Patrol video. In today's video, I am talking about putting insignia on your ABU cap. On the cadet side, only sewn insignia are worn by cadet officers, so if you're sewing it on your collar, you also have the sewn insignia on. On the cadet side, the only ones that are wearing sewn insignia on their covers are the ones that are wearing sewn insignia on their collars. And so that would be anyone who is a cadet officer from cadet second lieutenant to cadet colonel. On the senior member side, it's going to be anyone who is not enlisted. And that includes anyone from flight officer to major general in Civil Air Patrol. Regarding the placement of insignia, there's like a little seam like above where the bill of the cover is. There's like a little seam. It's going to rest on top of that. Just on top of that, which is about centered in the center of your cap. Okay, so you want to make sure that it is centered so that when you're wearing it, it's not like to the side. So really check to make sure when, like after you've sewn it on, even before sewing it on, just do a check, like put it on your head, look in the mirror, have someone else help you. Look, make sure it is centered. Because you do not want your insignia like on the side of your head. That would not be good. Because then you're not meeting the requirements in the regulation. And it looks kind of silly. So this is just a quick video on how to put insignia onto your cap for your ABUs. And if you have any questions, let me know. I know some people have tried to sew them on by hand, and that is very challenging to do. So if you do have access to a sewing machine, highly recommend doing that. Some people I know also send their stuff to a tailor, but I do think that sewing is a very useful life skill in general, so I strongly recommend trying to sew it on yourself, and you can always do it a couple of times. It doesn't hurt. If you're a cadet officer, you're going to get the opportunity to do it however many times you want to promote between the different officer grades. So that is going to be everything for my kind of initial introduction here. I'm just going to show you footage of me putting that insignia on. So the first step with this is that we're going to have to take this off. So as always, the first step is always going to be taking it off by seam ripping on the back. And so we got to be very careful not to rip the ABU material underneath. So I'm just making sure I get underneath. Right here, I'm underneath the thread, but I'm not going through the ABU material. And then I'm just going underneath that again and pulling that. Okay, so sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get started, especially with this stuff. Sometimes, especially if the stitches are really tight or if they're very close together, it can be a little hard to pull them off. And so we just got to be very careful while we're doing this. The key is patience. So I will speed this up so you guys just see the process. And then sometimes if it's pulled off enough on the back side, I might do it on the front side, just being very careful not to rip through the material. If you're not comfortable with this technique of going on this side, then you can always do it on the back side. It's just I'm creating a little bit of tension with the string and then pulling and ripping the seam that way. And then normally I have a little bit of difficulty doing the front side with the stitch back. Basically, when you sew, you stitch back on top of the sewing that you did before so that it doesn't come loose. And so normally this is a little bit tighter because it's got multiple rounds of thread on it. Like you can see how thick that is right there. So I always do that on the back side to pull that. And it normally takes a couple of strings to pull out. Alright. Okay, there we go. So we have officially removed the insignia from the cover. Fun fact, the fabric insignia always come in pairs, but you only need one for your cover. And so what we're going to do is the same process that we used for preparing the ones for the collar. So if you're not sure how to prepare insignia for your collar, same process. It's where we are using a tape measure. You can use a ruler. And you measure 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the dark blue to the edge of the silver. And I'm going to iron that down. I might need to do that one more time here. And make sure I really hold that down. I'm just going to verify it's 1/8 of an inch. And we want to do our best to make sure that when we're done, we've got 90 degrees and that the blue is parallel to the edges of the pips. Always keep the iron moving. And when I do insignia, I prefer to do the short sides first if it's applicable. Like if you just got second lieutenant, you're only going to have one pip, so it doesn't actually matter what the orientation is. But for this one, I prefer the short sides. So I'm going to follow that same process and do it with the other sides. Both short sides and the 2 remaining long sides. Alright, so now that I have ironed the sides, and they are 1/8 of an inch on each side, I have these little extras, which I'm actually going to cut off. Same process as the insignia. Alright, so that's about ready to be placed onto our cover. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use some pins to pin this down onto the cover. This is actually one of the more trickier things to sew because it has like the hard brim to it. And so I'm going to use a couple of pins so when I go and use the sewing machine, it'll be held down. Now the thing I want to make sure I do is that I have this centered and that it's sitting right on the center of the front, which is going to sit right about there. So for now I did 2 different pins, and I didn't do it over the corners because like you can see there's like a tiny bit of fabric right here that I'm going to want to sew in, and so I'm going to do my best to really like push that in and be very slow on the corners when I am doing this. Okay, so I did a final check to make sure that it was centered, and it looked centered to me. So I'm going to put the foot down. I'm going to make sure that it's the right stitching, and we're going to go for it. And as we get to the edge here, I'm going to really do my best to poke in. I lifted the foot and I'm putting it back down again. I'm going all the way. I'm actually going to do it by hand here. Hand stitch it forward to get to the corner, and then I lift the foot and I turn it 90 degrees. There we go. And then we continue forward. And I'm going to do that by hand and have the needle down. So you can see here, I've got my needle down, and then I'm just gonna rotate the cover so that that's 90 degrees. I'm going to go one stitch more forward, lift the foot, rotate 90 degrees, put the foot back down, and so that should about do it. So you can see on the back side, the stitching is pretty good. I did a little bit of overlap here, and it looks pretty good. And so one thing that I will have as a next step is that to make sure that this is centered correctly, I would put the cover on, check in the mirror to make sure that it is truly centered, and if it isn't, then you got to take it off and do it again, but if it is centered, then you're good to go. So that wraps things up for our video here. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. This one is a little bit tricky, especially trying to keep the insignia centered. That's something that I have found to be really challenging, and I know sometimes it takes a couple of tries. My suggestion, just be patient. It's a learning process. And once you've got it centered perfectly once, just keep track of that spot. And then anytime you put on new insignia, it'll be good to go. But don't use like a Sharpie or something. Do not do that. Do not Sharpie your cover. I've seen someone do that where they drew like a square, and I was like, don't do that. No, please don't do that. Please. That's not good. Don't ruin your uniform, please. So, that is going to be all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and that is all, folks. Until next time, toodles.